just imagine, December 7th, 1965, 24 years after Pearl Harbor. If you were a bishop at Vatican II, you would have lived through World War I, the Depression, World War II, the Cold War, and if you were an American bishop, the assassination of John F. Kennedy. At the closing session of Vatican II, Pope Paul VI said that the Church is in service to all of humanity. But as we begin to unpack the documents of Vatican II and some of the documents immediately after Vatican II, Pope Paul VI would go on to say that the deacon is the Church's service sacramentalized, and that deacons are living icons of Christ the servant. Ray, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the ecclesial nature of the church is broad and wide, and so people from the outside may view the church as, well, the Pope says that that's the way it is, and it is in the strictest sense of teaching from the chair, right? If he makes an ex-cathedra statement, then that's a doctrine dogma of the church. But what we're looking at here is he issued a motu proprio, which is by his own voice, his own hand. And in doing that, people would say, well, he said that, so that's why. It's not. The bishops voted, right? And it was an overwhelming vote. It was like 2,000 something to 3 or something like that in favor of the restoration. And the reason for that is coming out of the Second World War and the experience of the priests at Dachau and the other areas of the world, they saw this need. And then they hearkened back to the earliest moments of the church in Acts chapter 6. So you have that reality. And in his document, Paul VI made the statement that the reason for the renewal, restoration, or reestablishment, there are different ways that people have couched this, right? But the reason for the renewal was that they were going to go out into the communities and they were going to sacramentalize service that men were already doing, right? And so that's truly what sacrament is. It's a sign and symbol of something greater, something beyond the reality of what you and I understand in the strictest sense of the word. And so that was a beautiful gift to the church in that way. And then the bishops went out and began to promulgate this, more so in the United States than anywhere else. Here in New Orleans, we had Archbishop Hammond, who was a priest of the Northeast in the United States. He was named the Archbishop of New Orleans in the middle of Hurricane Betsy, left the Vatican, and the deliberations that came here to oversee the flooding and the church here. He was a paratrooper in the Second World War.
Yeah, I heard about his story.
He was a paratrooper in the Second World War, and there used to be, and there may still be, a part in here, a little place in here where it notes his service. He was a paratrooper jumping out of planes. So there's that connection. I think that Paul VI was not speaking only from his own experience and own voice as the leader of the church, but all of those voices that had resonated throughout the years leading up to that as we left the Council of Trent and moving forward. Because the Council of Trent, remember, did mention the restoration of the diaconate. It was just never acted upon. So all of this, in a way, is providential, that these things happen in the world. God has a way of applying grace on top of things that need that grace. So that's an idea, you know.
Yeah, many of those theologians and probably some of even the bishops had memories of World War II deeply ingrained. I'm thinking of John Paul II, was very influential in Vatican II, and of course he was deeply impacted not only by the Germans, but after World War II by the Russian communists.
Right. In his home country of Poland. Yeah. So his theology as a philosopher was personhood, right? Personalist kind of theology, and always seeking. And of course, the reason for that, it's understood that was a result of how human dignity was being stripped from human persons during the Second World War and in his own family, his own experience. And so he recognized that at the core of everything is the human person. And so from that, he began to teach and to work at that, right? This whole concept of human person and dignity. And so at the core of this, he also understood vocation very profoundly. And this is where you get into what is a deacon, what does a deacon do, right? And at the very core of his kind of theology and any good theology is the person. And so while we may carry out different functions in the church, people may see us in a role of preaching on Sundays or doing communion services or visiting the sick and those kinds of liturgical kinds of things, perhaps in the sense of charity, serving at homeless shelters, food kitchens, those kinds of things. The very core of who we are is being, right? What does it mean to be anything, a father? What does it mean to be a CEO of a company? What does it mean to just be a brother? And when you get down to the kernel and core of who we are as human persons, that's when you begin to see the active reality, the contemplative active reality of who we are as persons. And so then you begin to see that there has to be this kind of truth about who I am before everybody else and before myself. First, of course, those of us who have families, before our wife and our children, before our mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers in the core family, the domestic church, and then in terms of dealing with how do we interact with people in the world. And y'all know that I have on a number of occasions talked to you about the actual experience that I have that helps to ground me in this ministry, not as a functionary of the church, but as a disciple of Christ, right? To carry the word, the charisma forward. And I do that many times in the grocery store on aisle number 10, where they're called over to speaker, clean up on aisle 10. What does that mean? It simply means that someone who knows me or is familiar with me has a problem or a challenge that they're facing in life, and they want to have a little discussion. It's very brief, but all it is a cool cup of water. And sometimes that's all people really need to take the next step in faith, the next step in any struggle they're having in their life. So that's the being aspect of it.